Stop. Listen. Pay attention. This is not background noise, and it is not another message you scroll past. Chosen one. This moment is a direct interruption because something in you has been carrying weight without language. You have felt it in your body and in your thoughts. Fatigue that sleep does not fully clear. Pressure that arrives without a clear source. A sense of isolation even when you are not alone. You kept functioning, kept showing up, kept moving forward. But something inside you noticed the strain. Not panic, not collapse. Just a steady awareness that something was pressing in. This is where clarity begins. You are not here because of coincidence, timing tricks, or curiosity. You are here because this message matches a tension you have already been living with. The confusion you felt was not chaos. It was compression. The isolation was not abandonment. It was containment. And the fatigue was not weakness. It was the cost of staying regulated under conditions that would have scattered most people. Notice how you did not stop moving. You adjusted. You recalibrated. You went quiet when needed and decisive when it mattered. You did not ask for permission to remain functional. You did not wait for approval to stay coherent. Something in you moved on its own, not impulsively, not recklessly, but with a calm refusal to freeze. That matters more than you realize. There has been a subtle urgency around you recently. Not fear, urgency. The kind that sharpens attention instead of stealing it. You may have felt pulled to pause, to reassess, to step back internally, even while continuing externally. That was not hesitation. That was intelligence. A system checking itself under pressure. This message does not arrive to alarm you. It arrives to explain what you already sensed, but could not yet name. There is a reason the pressure did not break you. There is a reason you stayed oriented when things felt misaligned. There is a reason your movement did not require permission. You do not need to reach for answers right now. You do not need to resolve everything in this moment. You only need to recognize that this transmission is intentional, specific, and anchored to your lived experience. Nothing here is exaggerated. Nothing here is random. Stay with me. Your steadiness is not accidental, and what you move through is about to make sense. This message is not for everyone, and you already know that. It is not because others are incapable or unaware, but because what is being addressed here did not happen to them. It happened to you. The details align too precisely with your internal experience to be generalized. You are being addressed as chosen one, not as a title, not as flattery, and not as a role you need to perform. It is a functional description. It names the fact that you were the one inside the situation, carrying the pressure, absorbing the strain, and remaining intact while something tested the edges of your stability. There is no ambiguity about this. You are not listening from the outside. You are not observing someone else's story. The tension described did not brush past you. It moved through you. And yet, even as it did, you noticed something unusual about your own response. You did not fragment. You may have questioned yourself, but you did not lose coherence. You may have felt tired, but you did not shut down. You may have felt isolated, but you did not collapse inward. There was an automatic steadiness operating beneath your conscious effort. You did not have to summon it. It was already there. This is important. Many people rely entirely on conscious control when pressure appears. They think through every move, manage every emotion manually, and exhaust themselves trying to stay upright. You did not do that. Even when you were aware of the strained part of you remained regulated without instruction. Your system held its shape. That kind of stability is not learned in the moment. It is built long before the moment arrives. You may not have identified it as strength because it did not announce itself. It did not feel dramatic. It felt normal to you. But that is precisely the indicator. What feels normal to you would feel overwhelming to someone else. This message is here to remove doubt about that. You did not survive by accident. You did not stay functional through luck. You did not move forward because circumstances were easy. You moved because your internal structure did not require permission to do so. It operated quietly, efficiently, and without display. This is not about struggle. It is about design. And now that the moment has passed enough for reflection, clarity can enter without urgency. You are not being assigned an identity. You are being shown the one you were already operating from, even before you consciously recognized it. Stay present. What comes next will explain why this stability mattered and why the pressure revealed it instead of destroying it. There is one symptom you recognize immediately, even if you never named it clearly. It showed up as a low, persistent tension that sat beneath your days. Not sharp enough to panic you, not heavy enough to stop you, just constant enough to make you wonder why ordinary things required more energy than they used to. You may have interpreted this as burnout stress or emotional overload. You may have questioned your motivation, your focus, or your capacity. At times, you may have judged yourself for not feeling as light or enthusiastic as before. But that interpretation misses what was actually happening. This was not a problem. It was a signal. Your system was not failing. It was adapting. The tension you felt was the sensation of internal adjustment under pressure. The kind that occurs when something is shifting, but has not yet stabilized into a new configuration. You were not breaking down. You were recalibrating in real time. This is why rest alone did not fully resolve it. Sleep helped, but it did not erase the feeling. Distraction worked temporarily, but the sensation returned. Even moments of calm carried an undercurrent of alertness, as if part of you was staying online while another part tried to relax. That was not anxiety. That was readiness without panic. Your body and mind were responding to transition, not threat. When pressure increases gradually, the nervous system does not always react with obvious alarms. Instead, it tightens subtly. It conserves energy. It prioritizes coherence over comfort. That is exactly what you experienced. Your system chose stability over ease, and it did so automatically. This is where self-judgment becomes unnecessary. You were not weak for feeling this way. You were not unfocused. You were not losing direction. You were carrying an internal load that had not yet been named, and your awareness was picking up on it before your language could. Notice something important. Even with this sensation present, you continued to function. You made decisions. You handled responsibilities. You stayed oriented. The signal did not disable you. It informed you. That is the difference between a flaw and an indicator. A flaw disrupts function. A signal refines it. What you felt was your internal structure responding to compression, not collapsing under it, but adjusting its alignment so that movement could continue without damage. This is why the experience felt strange, but not catastrophic. You were aware of strain, but you were not consumed by it. This reframing matters because it changes how you understand yourself. You were not enduring something meaningless. You were processing a shift while remaining operational, and that is not accidental. Hold this understanding gently. You do not need to force conclusions yet. You only need to recognize that what you questioned about yourself was actually evidence of internal intelligence preparing for what comes next. What you were responding to did not come from nowhere. The pressure you felt was not random, and it was not purely internal. There was an external component to it, even if it never announced itself loudly. It arrived quietly through timing, through demand, through a sequence of moments that required more from you without explaining why. This kind of pressure does not feel like an attack. It feels like compression. It shows up as too many variables arriving at once. Decisions that could not be postponed. Responsibilities that overlapped instead of lining up neatly. Expectations that increased without formal acknowledgement. None of it dramatic. All of it cumulative. The structure of your days changed just enough to apply steady force. And this was recent. Not distant past. Not a vague season. A coordinated window where multiple points of demand converged. The timing matters because it reveals intent, not intention in a mystical sense, but in a structural one. Systems apply pressure to test load-bearing capacity. Life does the same. Here is what stands out. You did not disengage. Under this invisible weight, many people become erratic. Their focus splinters. Their emotions spike. Their behavior grows reactive. You did not do that. You noticed the strain, but your actions remained measured. You may have slowed internally, but you did not lose continuity. You stayed functional. That tells the truth. The pressure did not meet emptiness. It met structure. It did not expose fragility. It revealed regulation. You were not spared difficulty. You were simply not destabilized by it. There may have been moments when you felt watched by circumstances, as if outcomes depended on your response more than usual. That sensation does not require belief or drama to explain it. When systems are under evaluation, attention increases. Variables matter. Precision matters. Your awareness sharpened because it needed to. This is not about opposition in a symbolic sense. It is about confrontation with limits. And you did not exceed yours. You respected them. You adjusted pace. You chose silence where noise would have drained you. You maintained function without overextension. That is composure under pressure. What is important here is not the existence of strain, but the absence of collapse. You did not need to prove strength. You demonstrated it by remaining intact. The pressure tested alignment, not worth. And alignment held. This reframing removes drama and replaces it with accuracy. You were not pushed to break you. You were pressed to reveal what was already stable. The experience did not demand reaction. It invited response. And you responded without spectacle. Stay grounded in this understanding. What you carried did not overwhelm you because it was met by something already prepared. The next layer will show how this pressure distributed itself across specific points in your experience and why each one mattered. The pressure you moved through did not arrive as one solid weight. It distributed itself across specific points, each one subtle on its own, but significant together. Understanding these points matters because it explains why the experience felt complex rather than overwhelming, and why you remained stable instead of reactive. The first point was doubt not loud or aggressive, but quiet and repetitive. It showed up as questions that did not demand immediate answers. Small uncertainties about timing, direction, or whether your effort was being recognized. This doubt did not derail you because you did not argue with it. You noticed it, let it pass, and continued acting from what you already knew. You did not need certainty to remain coherent. You trusted your orientation even while clarity was still forming. The second point was fear, but not the kind that spikes adrenaline. This fear was more procedural. It asked what would happen if things did not resolve quickly, if momentum slowed, if outcomes stayed unclear longer than expected. Many people respond to this by rushing or freezing. You did neither. You maintained pace. You allowed uncertainty to exist without letting it dictate behavior. That restraint prevented escalation. Fear remained information, not command. The third point was energy drain. This is where many people misinterpret their experience. You may have felt moments where motivation dipped or where tasks required more effort than usual. This was not loss of capacity. It was conservation. Your system prioritized essential function and reduced unnecessary output. You did not push yourself into exhaustion. You adjusted without dramatizing the adjustment. That is regulation at work. The fourth point was isolation. Not physical separation, but the sense that others could not fully track what you were carrying. Conversations may have felt thinner. Explanations may have felt inefficient. Instead of forcing connection, you accepted temporary distance. You did not assume abandonment. You recognized containment. This prevented resentment and preserved clarity. You stayed self-referenced rather than externally dependent. The fifth point was delay. This is often the most destabilizing for people. Outcomes that do not arrive on schedule can trigger impatience or self-blame. You experienced the delay, but you did not personalize it. You did not conclude that something was wrong with you or that progress had failed. You understood, even without conscious language, that timing was part of the structure you were moving through. You remained present rather than restless. Across all these points, one pattern stayed consistent. You did not overreact. You did not suppress what you felt, but you did not amplify it either. You allowed internal signals to register without letting them override function. This balance is not common. It requires an internal governor that many people do not develop. Notice how there was no dramatic internal dialogue pushing you toward extremes. No urge to abandon everything. No compulsion to prove yourself. No collapse into passivity. You stayed in the middle ground where adjustment happens quietly. That middle ground is where stability lives. This is why the experience did not turn into crisis. Each pressure point could have pulled you off center. Together, they could have fragmented your attention. Instead, they refined it. You became more selective, more precise, less reactive. That is not accidental behavior. That is the result of an internal structure that has learned how to distribute load without failing. You did not win by force. You did not endure by numbing yourself. You regulated. You stayed responsive rather than reactive. You allowed pressure to pass through without letting it define you. Understanding this removes the need to reinterpret the past as something you barely survived. You did not barely survive it. You navigated it. Quietly, effectively, without requiring permission or validation. Hold that recognition without inflating it. It is not about being exceptional. It is about being integrated. And integration is what allowed you to move through each pressure point without losing continuity. This understanding sets the foundation for what becomes clear when you step back and review what actually occurred. Now there is enough distance from the experience to review it without distortion, not to relive it and not to dramatize it, but to understand what actually took place. This is where evaluation replaces endurance and clarity replaces tension. When you look back, the most consistent feature is not what challenged you. It is how you responded across time. There were no sudden reversals in your behavior. No periods where you became unrecognizable to yourself. No moments where you abandoned your internal logic. Even when conditions shifted, your sense of self remained coherent. That rules out chance. If this had been luck, your stability would have been inconsistent. If it had been coincidence, your responses would have varied wildly. Instead, there was continuity. You showed up as the same person on low-energy days and high-demand days. That sameness under changing pressure is not accidental. It is structural. It is tempting to explain this away by saying you are simply used to difficulty or that you have learned to cope. But coping implies constant effort. What you demonstrated was not effort-heavy. It was efficient. You were not holding yourself together by force. You were held together by alignment. This distinction matters. You did not rely on external reassurance to stay oriented. You did not need constant feedback to confirm your direction. When information was incomplete, you paused without spiraling. When answers were delayed, you adjusted expectations without resentment. These are not the behaviors of someone barely managing. These are the behaviors of someone internally organized. Another important point becomes clear in review. You did not lose time to emotional recovery. After moments of strain, you returned to baseline quickly. There was no prolonged fallout, no lingering destabilization. Your system absorbed impact and redistributed it without long-term disruption. That is resilience in its most practical form. Remove any explanation that attributes this to personality quirks or favorable circumstances. The pattern holds regardless of context. That tells you something essential. Your stability is not situational. It is intrinsic. This is why reframing the experience matters. You were not navigating chaos. You were moving through a test of coherence, and coherence held. The pressure clarified what was already integrated instead of creating something new. Recognizing this does not require pride or comparison. It requires honesty. You remained internally consistent under conditions designed to fragment attention. You did not harden. You did not numb. You stayed flexible without losing shape. That is the confirmation. What happened was not a near miss or a narrow escape. It was a demonstration of baseline resilience. You were not elevated into strength. You were already operating from it. The experience simply revealed it by contrast. As this becomes clear, another realization follows naturally. What you consider normal functioning is not as common as you assumed, and understanding that difference without exaggeration or ego brings the next layer of insight into focus. When you compare your response to what is typical under similar conditions, the difference becomes visible without needing exaggeration. Most people do not require extreme pressure to lose orientation. Smaller disruptions are often enough. A single unresolved conflict, a short period of uncertainty, or sustained fatigue can lead to emotional volatility, withdrawal, or impulsive decisions. You experienced multiple stressors at once, and yet your presence remained steady. This is not a judgment of others. It is an observation. Human systems vary in how much load they can carry while remaining integrated. Many people manage well when conditions are predictable, but become reactive when variables overlap. You did not. You stayed present even when clarity was incomplete. Under pressure, common reactions include overthinking emotional leakage, urgency to resolve everything immediately, or the need to externalize discomfort. You did not move in those directions. You allowed complexity to exist without rushing to simplify it prematurely. That restraint is uncommon. What makes this notable is not that you endured more. It is that you required less correction afterward. You did not need to repair damage because you did not create much in the first place. Your responses stayed proportionate. Your internal dialogue remained measured. You did not turn temporary strain into a personal narrative about failure or inadequacy. Many people would have interpreted the same experience as proof that something was wrong with them. They would have internalized the pressure as identity. You did not. Even if you questioned yourself briefly, you did not stay there. You returned to center without effort. This is where rarity enters not as superiority, but as statistical difference. Fewer people maintain coherence under layered pressure without either hardening or collapsing. Fewer still do so quietly without needing to prove strength or seek validation. Your stability did not announce itself. It did not require recognition. It simply functioned. This matters because it changes how your experience should be understood going forward. You do not need to become something else to handle complexity. You already demonstrated that your baseline is sufficient. You do not need to intensify effort to remain intact. You need to preserve the structure that already works. Understanding this difference does not separate you from others in value. It separates you in response pattern. And response patterns determine outcomes more reliably than intentions or beliefs. This comparison is not meant to elevate you. It is meant to orient you, to show you that what felt ordinary to you is not universally so. And recognizing that allows you to move forward with accuracy instead of doubt. From here, the focus shifts away from comparison entirely and toward clarity, toward understanding what this stability actually is and why it does not need to be activated, because it was never dormant. What needs to be clarified now is simple, but often misunderstood. The steadiness you demonstrated was not something you turned on. It was not a response you summoned in crisis. It was your baseline. The pressure did not activate strength. It revealed structure. Many people believe resilience is something that appears only when needed, like a reserve that must be accessed under stress. That was not your experience. You did not feel yourself shifting into a special mode. You remained yourself. The same internal organization that guides you on ordinary days carried you through compressed ones. That tells the truth. Your strength does not come from intensity. It comes from coherence. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions are aligned closely enough that they do not compete for control when conditions tighten. There is no constant internal negotiation, no tug of war between impulse and restraint. When adjustment is required, it happens quietly, without spectacle. This kind of stability is built through preparation rather than reaction. Preparation does not mean training for a specific outcome. It means living in a way that integrates experience instead of fragmenting it. Over time, this creates an internal architecture that does not need reinforcement under stress. It holds because it is already load-bearing. You may not have named this maturity because it did not feel like growth in the dramatic sense. It felt like normalization. Challenges arrived, were absorbed, and passed through without leaving residue. That is not stagnation. That is integration. It is important to avoid framing this as something extraordinary or mystical. There is no need to reach beyond what is observable. Your stability is grounded in how you process information, regulate emotion, and pace action. These are practical capacities. They mature through consistency, reflection, and self-honesty. This clarification matters because it protects you from misunderstanding yourself. You do not need to search for power or wait for permission to trust your responses. You have already seen how you operate when variables stack. You stayed clear. You stayed oriented. You stayed intact. This is not an identity to inflate. It is one to acknowledge accurately. From here, the work is not to become stronger. It is to recognize the structure that already exists and to respect it. That respect shapes how you rest, how you decide, and how you engage with what comes next. With this understanding, the experience you moved through no longer feels like an anomaly. It becomes confirmation. And confirmation brings a quiet confidence that does not need display, only application. Now the task is integration, not analysis. What you understand does not need to stay abstract. It can settle into how you move through your days without effort or vigilance. This is where awareness becomes practical. First, allow yourself real rest, not collapse, not withdrawal, but deliberate restoration. Your system held shape under pressure because it regulated intelligently. Respect that by giving it space to reset without guilt. Rest is not retreat, it is maintenance. Second, refine discernment. You do not need to engage every demand or explain every decision. Notice where your attention is genuinely required and where it is being pulled unnecessarily. Your stability improves when you choose focus instead of obligation. Clarity protects energy. Third, strengthen boundaries quietly. You do not need confrontation to create separation. Sometimes the most effective boundary is pacing. Respond when aligned. pause when uncertain. You are allowed to let things wait without justifying the delay. Fourth practice. Patience with timing. Delays are not always obstacles. Sometimes they are spacing mechanisms that prevent overload. You have already shown that you can remain present without forcing resolution. Trust that capacity. Let outcomes arrive without chasing them. Fifth, stay oriented to what matters most. Pressure can narrow attention onto immediate problems. Balance that by reconnecting with your broader direction. Not as a goal to strain toward, but as a reference point that keeps current challenges in proportion. Sixth, keep your body involved. Regulation is not only cognitive. Simple routines, movement, breath, and consistent rhythms anchor your nervous system. These are not techniques to fix something. They are ways of maintaining coherence. Integration does not require new strategies. It requires honoring what already works. You do not need to monitor yourself constantly. You only need to notice when alignment begins to drift and adjust gently rather than reactively. As this settles, the experience you move through no longer needs to be revisited. It becomes part of your internal map. You know what pressure feels like. You know how you respond. That knowledge reduces uncertainty going forward. This is not about preparing for another test. It is about moving with trust in your baseline. You have evidence now. Evidence of steadiness, of proportion of resilience that does not demand effort. Let this awareness soften you rather than harden you. You are not required to stay braced. You are allowed to move forward with calm confidence, carrying less tension because you understand yourself more accurately. The final step is simply to seal this understanding without turning it into a performance. What remains is reassurance, closure, and a quiet acknowledgement of what you already know. Take a breath and let this settle. Nothing here demands urgency from you now. What needed to be seen has been seen. What needed to be named has been named. You did not move through that period by force. You did not survive by chance. You remained intact because your internal structure already knew how to hold. That is the core realization. Simple, grounded, real. You are not behind. You are not recovering from failure. You are not waiting to become ready. You are already operating from a place of coherence that does not require permission, validation, or explanation. The pressure did not define you. It clarified you. Let that be enough. You do not need to revisit every detail or keep proving this to yourself. Trust is quieter than that. Trust shows up as ease in your decisions, patience with timing, and confidence that does not announce itself. You are allowed to move forward without bracing. Carry these affirmations gently, not as slogans, but as reminders. You remain steady under pressure. You trust your internal alignment. You move forward without forcing. If this message reached you clearly, leave a simple marker in the comments. Type 777 or write, "I remember." Not for visibility, but for acknowledgement. A way of sealing what you recognized in yourself. If this transmission resonated, stay connected. Subscribe so the next message finds you without searching. There is more clarity ahead, and it will meet you with the same calm precision. You are not late. You are not lost. You are already moving, and nothing essential was stopped. Stay steady.